And we're breaking into our scheduled broadcasting, of course, to bring you that top story coming out of Iraq, and that the Iraqi president says that he is willing to resign rather than name a prime minister that is being rejected by protesters. Let's get more on this from our correspondent in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. Dorsa Jabbari joins me on the phone. And Dorsa, we're just getting this news in that President Salih is certainly making a statement that will resonate across the country, and certainly right down to Basra, where the PM candidate sits.
Yes, absolutely. Sohail, we've just heard from his office, the president's office, that his letter of resignation is now being submitted to the parliament, and that's because he has been under a tremendous amount of pressure from the various parties and coalition groups within this parliament to try and come up with a candidate that will please all sides, you know, the protesters on the streets, as well as the political parties, as well as the alliances that those parties have formed with not only other groups within parliament, but outside parties as well that have a vested interest in this country. The president had said in the past that if he's not able to find a suitable candidate to nominate to form a government, he will resign. So we knew that this might be a possibility, but we certainly did not expect this to happen on
is the
Thursday.
pressure... Sorry, Dorsa, is the pressure really coming from the public as such on the president, or does the president, in a loose term, have an agenda himself about the type of prime minister that should be taking up office in light of the civil unrest that we've seen across the country?
No, as far as we understand, the president has been trying to align his interests with those of the people on the streets, and we know that he has had the backing and support of the clerical establishment in Iraq that comes from Najaf, that has very powerful influence across the country. So we know that he wanted to try and find a candidate that was going to please that side, the people, and that is something that was just virtually impossible, because the Constitution here states that the ruling coalition party within Parliament has to nominate a candidate, and the president really doesn't have a say in how that candidate is selected. It's up to the ruling majority parties in Parliament. So constitutionally, he didn't have much power. He had to nominate whoever was given to him by that group, and that on Wednesday, that group, which is the Al-Bana coalition group in Parliament, that is made up of groups that are backed by Iran, had nominated the governor of Basra. And the president did not announce that candidate as the next prime minister. And we believe that to be that he was going to do that either today or maybe some point tomorrow, that he was just waiting to find out how people would react to that nomination. But it was very, very clear early on, as soon as we heard the name of that governor, that is Asad al-Aidani, the governor of Basra, that the people were adamant that they would not accept that decision. You know, Basra has had protests way before we've seen any of that in Baghdad. Basra is one of the poorest provinces in Iraq, even though it has 70% of the country's oil reserves, and major oil fields are from that province, but the main infrastructure doesn't exist in that province. This is one of the reasons people have been demonstrating for well over a year there. And they're adamant that this governor is not part of what the people on the streets want to be in government. So his decision, really the president's decision, Barham Salih, not to go ahead with announcing the nomination for this prime minister, was seen as an effort to really please the people, the public, that say they don't want a prime minister who doesn't listen to their needs and demands, and they want to be able to elect their prime minister. But unfortunately, the country's constitution is based on a parliamentary system and not a presidential one, which is what the demonstrators have wanted. And that's what they've been fighting for since the beginning of October. And over 480 people have lost their lives trying to change the system, the constitution of the country. This constitution was written in 2005 after many, many consultations were held with various legal groups. And the people of Iraq voted. There was a referendum on this constitution. So they were a part of the process initially But now, since then, they say that the country has become so corrupt and open to outside influences, mainly that of Iran and the United States, that they can no longer tolerate the system. It's not good enough for them. They want to be able to have the kind of standard of life that they're entitled to. Iraq is OPEC's second largest producer of oil. Over 4.5 million barrels of oil are produced in Iraq, and yet when you are in the country, you don't see that money anywhere. It's not in the infrastructure or anywhere in the country. This is what is the main point of contention for Iraqis. They say they should be able to have the standard of life that they want, given the wealth that is available in their country.
Indeed, and we'll talk about sort of the technocrats and how a new candidate could be certainly put into position as the Prime Minister. But if we talk about, and you touched upon it, about outside influence in internal Iraqi affairs, part of the gripe, you might say, that the public have is about external influence, is about the influence of Iran. And this particular candidate, Iadani, has been nominated by, you might say, the Iranian-supported bloc of parliament. What is that relationship on the ground in society at the moment about the relationship between Iraqis and Iranians, between Iraqi politicians that have the support of Iranian-styled either clerics or politicians from across the border?
Well, I think it's a very complicated relationship. It's very difficult to say. But the one thing that is certain is that there is a very strong anti-Iranian feeling that is present in Iraq. We've seen the attacks that were carried out against the Iranian consulate in Najaf and Karbala, where they set fire to those buildings, and people made it very clear that they did not want Iran's assistance or influence in their country anymore. Now, Iran and Iraq have had also a very tumultuous relationship. They were at war with each other in the 1980s for 8 years, and then after that, following the fall of Saddam Hussein, there was an opportunity for a relationship to forge between the two sides. And that's what happened. That's when they became much closer. And with the rise of ISIL in northern Iraq, the Iranians came to the help of the Iraqis at that time under Nouri al-Maliki as the prime minister. And they helped the Iraqis fight ISIL in many parts of this country. And that is really when they became much, much closer. And they have a very long and strong economic relationship as well. They share a very large border between each other, and they have over nearly $13 billion worth of trade between the two countries. So they say that this relationship is very, very important to them, and it's going to continue. But now the feeling on the streets is that they no longer want the Iranians to dictate to them how their country should run politically. They don't want any kind of powers to be exerted from one side or the other. And that's really what we're seeing a lot on the streets now.
Indeed, and of course, when we come to the potential candidates for the position of Prime Minister, speaking to us on the Al Jazeera News Hour a short while ago was Marwan Karbalan, a senior analyst here in Doha, and he was talking about the fact that there are many technocrats in Iraq. It was a very well-disciplined, very well-educated country. In the days of Saddam Hussein, these people did exist. Yet the only people that are coming to the forefront are those with a great deal of either economic or political baggage with titles of corruption added to it, that the people are very aware of. Why are these technocrats not, you might say, visible to the public at large, or why are they not coming forward? Is there a reason for that?
Well, Iraq has witnessed a huge brain drain over the past few years. Many of those people have left the country. There's just not that much interest in them coming back and taking part in the political process. But this is one of the main problems that this president is facing that led to his resignation, because the protesters, the other political parties, they wanted a candidate to replace Adel Abdul Mahdi, who wasn't part of the political process. And that is something that is very hard to find. It's, I would say, virtually impossible. you would have to really bring somebody in from outside of Iraq if that's what you wanted to do. And that on its own proposes a series of challenges under these circumstances. So I think this was one of the major issues that the protesters were adamant about. They wanted somebody who wasn't part of the political establishment in the country, but they didn't have a candidate either. So it wasn't like there was another option. And this is what was the most difficult point for the president. And this is, I believe, one of the reasons that led to him being forced to resign, because he was under tremendous pressure to accept one of these candidates. There were 3 candidates over the past week that were put to him by Al-Banat coalition in parliament, and he didn't accept any of them. He said he would not put that name forward and announce that those names and candidates as the next prime minister, because he knew that the people on the streets would not accept that, and that would mean further unrest and insecurity would be unleashed across the country. So I think he just, at this point, felt that he had no other option to resign. And under the Constitution, this is not clear what will happen next, because their Constitution has not stipulated when the president resigns or the prime minister resigns or when the posts become vacant. So we know that the political establishment, the spokesperson for Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, during last week's Friday prayers in Karbala said that there must be elections held immediately. So that's what the country really needs at this point. But the issue is the Iraqi parliament and the electoral commission in the country have said that they need at least between 6 months to 1 year to be able to hold elections in the country for logistical and security reasons. So they're not equipped to, let's say, go to the polls in a month or anything to that effect. So it's very, very unclear what will happen next. And we know that the outgoing Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mehdi, is still in office. He's the caretaker Prime Minister. He's still holding his weekly cabinet sessions. He's still conducting his job, his duties, because there hasn't been a replacement for him. So this resignation now of the president just makes things much, much more unclear.
And of course, the issue of what happens next is perhaps the big unknown question. This is, you might say, new ground, a new route, a new reality that the Iraqi political establishment and the public at large have never experienced before. You touched on it, with no sort of viable prime minister and with a potentially the president, if he can't be sort of talked out of it, having resigned, who takes charge of the country. Even though you have a caretaker prime minister, it really does leave the country leaderless.
Yes, and that is something that is very, very dangerous in Iraq at the moment, to create a political vacuum, which in turn could possibly create a security vacuum, because there are various different groups that have armed wings in Iraq. They are also part of the government and parliament. So without clear leadership, there will be a sense that these groups could try and assert their own power over one another. And this is something that has happened in the past. And this was certainly a worry of many analysts we spoke to here over the past few weeks, that this uncertainty just creates that kind of vacuum for these issues to play themselves out. And that is what the president was trying to avoid. And even Grand Ayatollah Sistani had mentioned that this is something that should be avoided. We cannot have this kind of power vacuum in the country, because it creates such security instability in this country. So this is why they were trying to find a candidate, but they failed clearly. So now this is something that will be very, very important to the security apparatuses, because also, according to the Constitution, the Prime Minister is the Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces in the country. So with the caretaker Prime Minister, he's still technically Adel Abdel Mehdi in charge of the country's security forces. Now, with the president's resignation, we don't know how he will move forward, what his next move will be as well. This could be an opportunity for him to use to stay on until they can hold elections in Iraq.
Well, of course, we'll continue to monitor events. There are more statements that are coming out of the Iraqi capital as the day progresses. For the moment, Dorsa Jabbari, our correspondent in Baghdad, thank you.